So in this video, I want to show you all the different tools that you can use, and I want to encourage you when you finish watching this video to experiment with everything you have seen, because no matter what you model, as long as you know most of what Blender has to offer, then you would always find the quickest or the most efficient way to build something. And I guess another thing I should say is that you should always keep on practicing. For example, just try and take on as many projects as possible and just succeed and fail as many times as you can. And just using all these tools will definitely help you a lot. And you'll see in the next video, actually my references are just a blockout, and you'll see that in the course I actually just build on top of the reference quite a lot, because I also wanted to just design while I'm recording, and I suggest that you do the same. So I guess first I'll just talk about the object mode tools, and most of them I've already gone through while we were creating the crate. But first I just want to talk about setting origins. So you'll see by default our cube has an origin, which is this orange point over here, and the origin is definitely super important. And namely, the first one is that if I were to just rotate, then it'll just rotate around the origin. And if you change the place, for example, I'll just change it real quick just by tabbing into edit mode like so and pressing G to move. You'll see that whenever you move things in edit mode, your origin stays at the same place, and you'll see now the orange dot is at the same place, but it's no longer in the center of the cube. So if I were to press R to rotate, then you'll see that it's being affected by where the origin is. So I'm pressing S to scale, and it's scaling from where the origin is as well. So, and another thing is that, for example, if you were to add a mirror modifier, it definitely is affected by the origin as well. For example, if I were to put it on the Y, then you'll see that it's affected here and here. It is probably why I like to mirror with empties quite a lot, because most objects have different origins, and you would have to be pretty careful about them. But just having an empty to mirror on definitely makes things a lot easier. But enough about the mirror modifier. So I'll just show you how I would normally change my origins. If somehow I accidentally move my origin like this, and I just wanted it to be in the center of the cube because I want to rotate it the way I was before, I would just go into Object, Set Origin, and I'll just set Origin to Center of Mass, and you'll see the origin's now in the center. And if I were to rotate now, it is pretty good. Another thing is that if you were to hit Control A to apply location, you'll see that the origin always goes to the center of the world. That can be useful sometimes, but it's really up to you how you want to use it. And another thing is that you can also change your origin to specific places. For example, if I wanted my origin to be exactly at this vertex, then first I would just make use of my 3D cursor. So it is in the snap menu over here, but I'll just do it real quick. So if I were to hit Shift S or go into the snap menu and press cursor to select it, then you'll see that the 3D cursor is over here. And if I were to just tab into object mode and just set my origin to 3D cursor, you'll see that it is now over here. So if I were to try to rotate it now, you'll see that it is pretty cool. So over here, we have the clear transforms, which I've gone through before, but I'll just go through it again. If you have rotated all your stuff, for example, and you just want everything to be neutral, then you would hit Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S to clear the rotation, location, and scale. And you'll see that since our origin's over here, the center of the origin is just going over here. That's why the cube is exactly over there. Now another thing is applying your transforms. So if you were to hit Control A, you can apply a bunch of transforms, and sometimes you can save a lot of trouble by applying them. For example, especially for the scale, if I were to maybe scale something like so. And for now, let me just go to Object and set Origin to Center of Mass to make things easier. If I were to just scale it on the axis by hitting S and then X, and then maybe I just go into edit mode and use the bevel tool, so Control B, you'll see that the bevel is acting super weird, and that's because our scale is not applied yet. So what you would do is you just go into object mode, hit Control A, and apply your scale. And now if I were to go to edit mode and bevel, you'll see that the bevel is working pretty well as well. So that's one of the reasons why you would apply your transform. Another reason is probably maybe if you want to apply the location, if you wanted to move the origin to the center of the world, but I barely use that. So now I've touched a bit on snapping cursor. We can snap our cursor exactly at any point we select. For example, if I were to just select the object as a whole in object mode and hit Shift S and go to cursor to selected, then it'll just go in the middle of this. Same as in edit mode, if I were to maybe select an edge or like a vertex, then you'll see that we can move our 3D cursor wherever we want it to, and that can definitely be pretty useful. And if you wanted to move your cursor to the center of the world, just hit Shift S and hit cursor to world origin. Another thing is that, for example, if I were to just add a monkey like this, and maybe I wanted the monkey to be exactly at this vertex, and you'll see that it's going to be pretty hard to eyeball. So what I would do is to just put my 3D cursor over here. So I'll hit Shift S and hit cursor to select it, so that 3D cursor is now over here, and I'll just select the monkey and hit Shift S again, and then I'll hit selection to cursor, and it'll be, the origin of this will be moved exactly to the 3D cursor. For example, if I wanted a monkey at every one of this, then I'll just quickly selection to cursor over here, selection to cursor, Shift D to duplicate, and I'll just put another one over here, selection to cursor. So you can definitely see how we can just snap different objects pretty easily, and this is definitely a tool that I use quite a lot. Now, other than that, there are definitely some pretty cool ways to go about it, but I'll just talk about those for now. So now let me just press Shift S and go to cursor to world origin, and now I'll just talk about duplicating. So just now you saw that I duplicated. If I were to hit Shift D, then I can duplicate my cube, but actually if you hit Alt D, you can duplicate linked, and that means that if I were to just go into edit mode on this and maybe make some changes, maybe I bevel this edge over here, you'll see that whatever we duplicated share the same data, and that can definitely be super useful to save time sometime. So let me just delete all of these and keep this for now. So duplicate is Shift D and duplicate linked is Alt D. So another thing is that if you want to join your item, for example, I just duplicated a bunch of this, but rather than having them as different objects, I want them all to be one object. So what I'll do is you just shift select all of these and hit Control J so that they are selected and join together. Another thing is that when you have one object which has a modifier, for example, let me just put a bevel modifier for this one. Something that I really like to do to save time is to just select all of this and maybe select this last. And if I were to hit Control J and make sure that this is selected last, you can see that's highlighted in yellow. So Control J, you'll see that it'll copy all the modifiers from the active one, and not just the modifiers, it'll probably copy maybe the normals data and material data, anything that we can do to save time as well. So I definitely like using this sometime. So another thing is that when we have an object, we can actually hit Control C to copy and Control V to paste as well. And you can also do this when you have two Blender files open. You can just hit copy and paste like so. So other than that, I also use parenting quite often. For example, if I have a bunch of different objects, for example, if I had a crate, then I would try to parent everything to the lid and the other half to the bottom of the crate. But if I were to maybe duplicate a lot of stuff and just have this over here, I'll just select all of these and shift select this so that this is selected as well. And I'll hit Control P and set parent to object so that if I were to try to move, rotate, or scale this, these are all the children that are being affected by this. And this can definitely keep things a lot manageable as well. So other than that, we can also move things into collection over here. So the shortcut for it is to use a shortcut M. So use select it, hit a shortcut M, new collection, and you can call it whatever you like. Maybe I can call it collection A and hit enter, and you'll see now these are in a collection, which is super handy. So now shading smooth can be a pretty important tool. For example, I'll just show it to you on a cylinder as well, and maybe, oh, I guess the UV sphere and the cylinder special. So in real life, things do not have this square stepping gradient or this rectangular stepping gradient in our shading. They're actually shaded pretty smooth. So if I were to just select this, right click and shade smooth, or just go over here and hit shade smooth, then you'll see that it's smoothed over and definitely looks a lot more than like it would in real life. And over here, if I were to right click and shade smooth, you'll see over here things are shaded smooth, but it definitely looks a bit weird. So what you can do is you just go into the normals menu here and turn on auto smooth like so that the shading is a lot better. And another thing is I believe there is the convert to mesh tool, and one way I like to use it a lot is, for example, if I have one object with a lot of modifiers. For example, I put a bevel modifier on this, and maybe a subdivision surface, and perhaps a wireframe or something like that, just to have this really weird effect. And you'll see that if I go into edit mode, it is just this cube over here. So if I wanted to turn it into real geometry, rather than hovering my mouse over the modifier and hitting Control A, I would just quickly go to object and hit convert to mesh, and you'll see that they're all applied pretty well. But you can also just apply it by hitting Control A while your mouse is over the modifiers as well. Another thing is that when you are to maybe create a curve object, I'm just hitting Shift A and adding a NURB circle for now, and let me just go to the properties over here and go into geometry and just change the depth to something a bit higher. You'll see that if I go into edit mode, it is not real geometry that I can handle. I can only just play with this curve itself. So what you would do is you just select this and go into convert to mesh from curve, and you'll see if I go to edit mode now, then you'll see that it is actually a curve that we can edit pretty well. Maybe we can select these faces and extrude them in. I don't know. Depends on the detail that you want to make. So other than converting to mesh, I also like to select group and select linked. So let me just real quick parent all of these to this empty over here. So I'll hit Control P and hit parent to object like so. So one thing I like to do is when I select this and I want to just select all these other stuff, I would go into select and select grouped and children, and then it'll just select all of these as well. And another thing is that maybe if I give this a green material and just copy it over here, so let me just give this green material, and let me just go into material preview for now, and for this one I will give it a red material for now, and let me just copy it over to these. Okay, so let me just duplicate it real quick. So you'll see that if I wanted to select everything that is exactly green, it'll actually be pretty hard. So what you would do is you just maybe select one and go to select and select linked, or hit Shift L. And there are definitely different ways that you can select them, but probably one that I'll be using quite often is select linked by materials, and it'll just select everything that is of the same material, and that can be definitely super useful as well. Now, aside from these selection tools and most of the others we have gone through while we have been making the box, but if you're not familiar with them, I suggest you just go through all of these again. And another thing is that I wanted to talk about the transform orientation as well as the pivot point. So if I were to just add in a cube, and let me just go into solid shading for now. So if you wanted to rotate an object, you can just rotate it normally or just move it. So if I were to hit G and Z, it'll just move along the world Z. But if I were to rotate it a bit, like so, and if I wanted to move it in this direction that it is facing, if I were to hit GZ again, you'll see that it's just moving up. But rather than global, if you switch it to local, if I were to hit GZ now, it'll go in one direction, in the direction that it is facing, and that can definitely be super useful. Another way is, I'll just change it back to global. So another way is to just hit G and double tapping Z so that you can toggle the local transformation on, and this is definitely the way I like to use it the most. So aside from that, I don't use most of these other ones, so I'll just talk about the transform pivot point. So by default, we are in the bounding box center, which I believe is affected by the origin. It certainly acts like it, but the other ones that I like to use a lot, for example, let me just add a monkey this time, like so. So I'll have 4 different monkeys, and if I were to rotate them, you'll see that they're all being rotated together. But what if I wanted to rotate each of them individually and have them stay in their place? Then you would just go and switch over here to individual origin, and you'll see that if I were to try to rotate now, it is just being rotated individually, which can be pretty useful sometimes. Another thing is that if you switch it to active element, whatever you select last, for example, if I select this last, if I were to rotate now, it'll just be rotating around this as a pivot point. And I think that's pretty much it for most of the object mode tools that I use quite often. There are definitely so many important ones that you can use, but I'll just go into the edit mode tools now. So now I'll just go and add a cube like so, and now let me just tab into edit mode, and you'll see over here we have so many different tools, and you'll see that even the transforms that we have talked about in the object mode is here as well. So first I want to talk about the extrude tool, and it is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is you just hit E to extrude while something is selected, and it'll just extrude it. And it doesn't just have to be faces. If I were to just hit the number 2 to go into edge mode, and if I select it with left click and hit E to extrude, then I can extrude this edge to make a face, or I can also extrude this vertically to make this edge, I guess. And this can definitely be super useful. Another thing is that while you're extruding, for example, if I were to hit E, you can also constrain it to an axis. For example, I can hit X, Y, or Z while I'm doing an extrusion, which can be pretty useful. So let me just Control Z all that. Another super useful tool, and I believe this came pretty recently to Blender, is, for example, let me just make some geometry, is that if I were to extrude a geometry like this, I just added a few loop cuts like this, and I just press E to extrude and left click to confirm it. In the pop-up box over here, if I were to press dissolve orthogonal edges, it'll get rid of that annoying face that sometimes appear when you extrude from the outside like this. So that is definitely a super useful tool, and I definitely use the extrude tool pretty often. So let me just add in a new cube and talk about the inset tool. So the inset tool is used by the shortcut I, and extrude is with the shortcut E, by the way. So if I were to hit I to inset, then you'll see that it extrudes it inwards, like so, and this can definitely be a super handy tool. So another thing is that if you were to hit I to inset, but while you're insetting hit O, you will see that it is doing an outset, and that can definitely be super awesome if you want to inset it in the opposite direction. And another thing is that while you're insetting, for example, if I were to hit I to inset, and I'll just press O to turn off the outset for now, and if I hold control, you can see that I can adjust the depth if I want to. And if I were to just inset it again and just make sure that it's like exactly at the edge over here, and if I were to hit control this time, it kind of acts more like an extrusion, which I like to use quite often as well. So other than that, if you have a bunch of faces selected and hit the shortcut I, you'll see that these are both being insetted at the same time. But while you're insetting, for example, I'll select these two. If I double tap I, then it'll just inset individual, and you'll see that each of these individual faces are being insetted as well. And another thing is that if I were to just real quick, maybe add in the cube again, and just add a loop cut with Control R, and just delete this half. So I'm just selecting this face over here, hitting X, and delete vertices, and add in a mirror modifier, like so. You'll see that if I try to inset, like so, but hit the shortcut B, and make sure your individual is turned off, so hit I again, so that works. So if I have my boundary turned off with my mirror modifier on, then you'll see that it's being insetted like this, keeping the mirror modifier in consideration. So I can definitely like do some extrusions and have some pretty nice detail while I have the mirror modifier on. So I guess that's pretty much it for the inset tool as well. Now I want to talk a bit about the beveling tool. So pretty straightforward. If you were to hit Control B, then you can bevel an edge. Increasing and decreasing your mouse wheel will just add or lessen the amount of segments you have. And if you left click, you will also have a pop-up box in the bottom left. So you can change your width, your segment, and you can even change your shape. So if you turned it all the way up, it'll turn into a sharp corner, and if you turn it all the way down, then it'll just go inwards like so. So by default, I usually like to leave it at 0.5, but depending on what you want to make, you should definitely consider that. So another thing is maybe if I were to just bevel this edge like so, and I'll just demonstrate the clamp overlap tool. So while I'm beveling, if I hit Control B to bevel and press C to clamp overlap, you'll see that if I don't turn it on, then it'll just overlap each other, and it'll definitely create some shading problems and artifacts. So if you were to hit shortcut C, then it'll just stop at exactly the limit. And you'll see over here actually, we have created double vertices, which is something that we usually need to fix whenever we bevel two edges like that. So I'll just select all and just hit right click, or I can go to mesh and then clean up and just merge by distance, and you'll see it has removed two vertices, which are the duplicate vertices that used to be here. So that is a pretty handy way of removing your extra vertices. And other than that, you can also bevel vertices. So if I were to hit Control Shift B, then I'm beveling the vertice itself, which can be pretty useful. And maybe if I were to inset this and just select all these individual vertices and hit Control Shift B, you can see that we can kind of make a pretty cool profile like so, but you'll see that we make some pretty unnecessary geometry. So usually I would have to do something like this. So I'll just extrude it in first, or whatever I want to do with it, and I'll just select everything with a shortcut A. I'll hit X to delete and go into limited dissolve, so it will only delete the vertices that don't contribute to the shape of the cube, and that can definitely be super useful as well. So aside from the bevel tool, we also have the knife tool. So if I were to go into edit mode, the knife tool over here is something I use super often. And actually, let me talk about the loop cut tool for a bit. So if you want to use a loop cut, you will have to hit Control R to add a loop cut. Using your mouse wheel will increase or decrease the number of segments that you can use. When you do your first click, you'll see that you can slide your edge in one direction or the other. And if you confirm it again, then your loop cut is done, but you can change a lot of things afterwards if you want to. One thing that you should keep in mind is that loop cuts, they follow the quadrant topology flow. So if I were to maybe add in a torus, for example, and you'll see over here, if I were to go into edit mode, you'll see that torus itself is made up of squares that just repeats itself in this direction. You'll see over here we have square, square, square. So if I were to just hit Control R, like so, then it'll just follow along the path of these squares that you can have. And same in this other direction, you can also follow along in this direction. So where the loop tool is lacking is where we have something that doesn't really have four-sided topology. For example, if I were to add in a cone perhaps, so if I were to hit Control R, you'll see that it doesn't go around the cone itself, and that's because the cone is made up of triangles. So over here we have 1, 2, and 3 vertices, which make up this triangle over here. So our loop tool definitely won't work. So that is why some of the times I like to use the knife tool. So if I were to go into edit mode now and talk about the knife tool, you'll see that I can use the shortcut K to use my knife tool. So if I were to hit K and maybe draw a few points and hit enter, you'll see that we have drawn the geometry on top of our cube, and we can definitely extrude it or make any detail that we want to. And while I'm using the knife tool, I definitely like to use two shortcuts. So while I'm using the knife tool, shortcut K, I like to first press Z to cut through, and you can see in the bottom over here, Z cut through is on. And if I were to left click and confirm it, you'll see that it just goes through the entire mesh, which can definitely be super useful as well. And another thing is if I were to use a knife tool, I like to hold C and as well to constrain to an axis, because it just snaps our knife tool into 45-degree angles. If I were to hit enter, then we can definitely make some pretty cool sci-fi looking details like these. Something like this. So I guess that's pretty much it for the knife tool. It's not that complex, but I definitely use it so much. So over here we have the polybuild tool, which I will probably never use in this course, but it's something that I use for retopology, because when you use your polybuild tool, for example, if I were to select it, like so, you'll see that if you hover your mouse over an edge and left click and drag, you can quickly create geometry if you want to as well. And if you were to hold control, you can definitely create it like this as well while you're using the polybuild tool. But it is only something I use in retopology, so I won't talk about it too much. Another thing is that if I were just add in a cube again, over here we have a spin tool, which I guess I should explain with a cylinder maybe, or maybe I can just explain with a circle. So we have a circle over here, and with a spin tool you actually have to be pretty considerate of where your 3D cursor is. So by default the 3D cursor will be in the center of the world. If I were to maybe go into edit mode and just move the circle over here, and if I were to use the spin tool now and just try it out like so, you'll see that it is being extruded and spun around the 3D cursor itself. If I were to maybe move the circle itself pretty far away in edit mode and go into front view and try to use the spin tool, you'll see that we have a much wider arc. And you'll see that we also have a pop-up box again, and most of the time I use it for 90-degree angles, but if you want it to fill all the way, then you'll set it to 360 like so, and maybe turn up the number of steps, and you kind of get a torus all over again. So other than that, I really don't use it too much, so I'll hit X and delete so that I can talk about the other tool. So now we have the smooth tool, which I don't really use too much. So let me just go over here and just right click and hit subdivide with everything selected, and let me just turn the number of segments up, because it's much better to show with way more geometry. So if I were to select A for everything and just press this tool and just move the gizmo a bit, you'll see that it'll try to smooth everything, and this can definitely be useful sometimes if you want to just have a more smooth result, but I barely use this. So another thing is that if I were to just add in a cube again, and this tool I use so often, so we have, if you were to just left click and hold, we have the edge and the vertex slide. So let me just add a loop cut with Control R over here and right click so that it stays in place. So if I were to just double tap G, I can slide my edge from one place to another, and that can definitely be super useful, or you can just do it by hand like this. And aside from sliding your edge, you can also slide your vertices. So if I were to select this vertex like so and double tap G, then you can also slide it from one area to another, like so. So another thing that I kind of really like to use is to just scale different vertices in one direction or the other. For example, if I were to alt and left click to select this loop of edges, what I want to do is to just press S to scale, and I'll put it on Y in this case and hit 0. So scale all these by 0, and you'll see that all their Y locations are being averaged, and in the end they become kind of straight. and this can be definitely useful if you want to fix some crookedness. So what I would do is you just hit S, Y, and 0, and same thing if maybe you added a loop cut here and maybe this is out of line and this is out of line, then you would just alt select this with left click, hit S and then X and then 0, and you'll see that now this is in line. So this one I'll hit S and a Y and a 0, and you'll see now these edge loops are super straight, and that's definitely one form of loop manipulation that I like to use quite often. So another thing that I like to use is the shrink fatten tool, and it basically is wherever your face is facing. So in this case, the normal is facing this direction. If I were to hit Alt S, then it's going to move in that direction. And same with this face. For example, this face is facing upwards. If I were to hit Alt S, then it'll just go in the direction that it is facing. And I guess that's pretty much it. So now let me just add in a cylinder so that I can preview the shear tool a bit. I'll just rotate it on the Y by 90, so R, Y, and then 90. And I'll go into the front view. And to demonstrate the shear tool, I'll just try to rotate this. So I'm just box selecting this in edit mode, hitting R to rotate. And you'll see that when I rotate, it actually kind of loses its height over here as well as over here. It actually shrinks a bit. Well, it doesn't really shrink because it's keeping its circular profile, but sometimes this is an undesirable result. So what you would do is to just use the shear tool. So if I were to just use it, so I'll select this face over here and go into front view and just use this shear tool. You'll see that it's being rotated in a way that kind of preserves its shape, and that can definitely be super useful. So over here we have the rip region. So if I were to just use it over here, you can definitely rip one vertex away from another just to separate them. You can also use a shortcut V to just separate them by hand. You can also, I believe, separate entire edges like so. So if you just selected the edges and hit a shortcut V, then you can also separate them like this. And I guess that's pretty much it for most of the tools. Let me just talk a bit about this. So over here, I've already talked about the pivot points as well as the transform orientation in object mode. They work as well in edit mode, so I won't repeat them. So over here we have the snapping as well as the proportional editing. So if I were to maybe have this cube, and let me just go into edit mode like so, and you will see over here, if I were to turn on snapping, and I guess I can do this in object mode for now. So if I were to turn on snapping and try to move, you'll see that it'll move by increments, similar like according to the grid, I guess. But the power is when you use it for other stuff, maybe by snapping to vertex. So what if maybe I accidentally slid this, and let me just turn it off for now. So if I double tap G and slid this vertex over here, what if I want this vertex to be exactly in line with this one, only on the y axis? So you can't really eyeball it like this, so you can actually make use of snapping tools. So if you were to just turn on snapping and set it to vertex maybe, and if I were to move it on the Y, G and then Y, and put my mouse over this vertex, you'll see that it'll snap to this one, and it's copying the Y coordinate from there to there. And you can definitely snap in so many different ways, but I won't talk about them too much. One thing I kind of like to use is to align rotation to target. So if I were to maybe add a monkey for now, and maybe scale it down a bit, like so. If I wanted the monkey to just stick to the surface, then I would just turn on snapping and maybe set it to face, and if I were to just move it around, you'll see that the monkey is being snapped to the surface. Another thing is that if you turn on align rotation to target, you'll see that over here it's kind of being rotated in a weird way, and if I were to move it into different faces, you'll see that the monkey is rotating in all kinds of directions, which can definitely be useful for getting some kind of result that you want. So I guess that's enough for snapping. Now we have the proportional editing that we use quite a bit, but so I'll just explain it real quick. So let me just create this plane with hitting Shift A and just going to edit mode, right clicking and subdividing, and let me just turn it up to around 10 like so, and I'll just select this vertex in the middle. So what if I wanted to move this vertex, and let me just hit Shift Tab to toggle the snapping off. If I were to want to move this and I wanted the other vertex to be affected, at least a bit, then I would just turn this on or use the shortcut O to turn on proportional editing, like so. So if I were to turn it on, then you'll see that all the other vertices are being affected, and you can kind of change the fall off of how it looks. So one really nice way to visualize this is if I were to go into the front view so that this plane is exactly flat, if I were to just move it on the G up a bit, you'll see that it's exactly copying this kind of profile, like so. And maybe over here we have the sphere. If I were to try to move it, then it definitely is being moved and affecting other like a sphere. So I guess other than that, if I were to just add a cube and maybe bevel this edge like so, and what if I want to maybe add some night tool, but I want it to snap exactly in this direction in a correct way, you'll see that no matter how I do it, maybe in the front view I can kind of do it, but we're not facing this face in the exact way. So what I want to do is to just select this face with left click. I'll go into view, and I usually like to align view to active and set it to top, so that now your view is exactly aligned to this. So if I were to use the knife tool now, it isn't as tilted as before, and we definitely made this detail the way it should have been made. So other than that, I also like to be able to reposition my camera. So if I were to just go into camera, add my camera like so, and let me just make sure. Okay, so I have the camera over here. So I guess it's being added exactly at where the 3D cursor is. So if I were to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view, you'll see that it's looking over here. But what you can do is just hit Control Alt 0 to just snap the camera to wherever you're looking at, and that can definitely be super useful. So other than that, another thing that is super important, of course, is to use the different viewpoints over here, which I've been using all this time. So definitely try to get used to hitting numpad 1 to go into front view, hitting numpad 3 to go into side view, numpad 7 to go into top view. So another thing I want to say is that you kind of let me just delete the camera for now. If I were to just go into edit mode, one thing that I kind of like to do is to be able to select sharp edges. So if you were to go into the select menu over here, then we can select sharp edges, and I guess in this case it's kind of hard to show. So if I were to add a cylinder, and what if I wanted to bevel only these two edges, but I didn't want to select all of these? So maybe let me just duplicate it over, just to make it more of a hassle to select all these faces individually to bevel. So one thing I can do is to just go to select and select sharp edges, and make sure that you're in edge select, by the way, because it'll just select everything by mistake. So select sharp edges, and you'll see that it's just selecting everything that is over a 30-degree angle. So now if I were to hit Control B, then I can just bevel only the sharp edges, and we can get a pretty nice result that we could like. So another thing is I also like to select similar as well. So maybe if I were to select this face over here, and I didn't want to select all these other ones one by one, I would just go into select similar, and there's so many different ways you can select them. But in this case, we can select by area, and you'll see that we have selected everything that has the same exact area as this. So maybe I can hit I to inset and do some extra detail as well. So you can definitely see how useful this can be. So there are definitely so many other ways you can go about it, but I'll leave it up to you to decide what works best for you. So over here, we can also select by trait. So by default, so usually whenever you're trying to make a game model, you want most of your geometry to be either three-sided polygons or four-sided, and having n-gons like this. So for example, the circle over here is a many-sided face. So what you would try to do is to maybe go into select and select by trait, faces by side, and maybe you can do like greater than 4, so that you are able to select every face that is more than 4 sides, just to be able to see which are n-gons and which are not. And that can be definitely super useful. And another thing is that maybe if you have an interior face, and let me just create one real quick for the sake of trouble. So over here, you'll see that we have an interior face, and what if you were trying to do some cleanup and you can't really see where it is? So you'll see over here the shading is probably looking super weird because we have a interior face, and most of the times you'll probably make one by mistake, and we'll have to solve it. So what you can do is you just go into select by trait and interior faces, and you'll see that this is selected by default. Hit X and delete faces, and now the interior face is gone. So another thing that is extremely important is the ability to select loops. So if I were to just show it to you, so one is the edge loop, but another thing is that we can select face loops or vertex loops. So if I were to just press 2 to go into edge select and alt and left click, then you can see that I can select different loops, which I've probably been doing a lot of the times. So I hope you weren't too annoyed as well. So over here, I'm just selecting all these loops, but if I were to press 3 to go into face select, you can also select face loops, like so. And the loops just follow every 4-sided square as far as possible. You see that over here, it's actually stopping over here because we have this many-sided n-gon as well. So aside from being able to select loops, edge loop is just from here to here, but what if I were to select this, like so, and go into select and select edge ring, you'll see that it'll just select the opposite of loops. It's just selecting the rings that just repeats over and over. So over here, let me just real quick talk about selecting linked. So if you were to hover your mouse over any object and hit the shortcut L, then you'll see that everything that is linked will be selected, and that can be pretty useful for selecting things that are just connected to each other. And another thing is that I like to select shortest path. So if I were to hit numpad 1, hit shortcut 1 to go into vertex select. If I were to hit control and left click, it'll just try to select the shortest path from one vertex to another, and that can definitely be super useful just to select the edges that you want to. And all of these, whenever you're creating your model, you should definitely find the quickest way to select all the edges you want to, in case you want to bevel or do whatever you want to them. So I guess that's pretty much it for most of these select. These other selects are also super important, but I have gone through most of them in the create tutorial, so I won't talk about it too much. So let me just delete all of these for now and just add in a new cube. So again, adding is Shift A to add, and then over here is basically this menu. So if you hit Shift A, then you can add whatever you want to. Another thing is over here in edit mode, if you were to go to the mesh menu over here, you can also snap as well. But one thing that I kind of like to do is to merge by distance. So if I were to just artificially create double vertices, so let me just turn off the proportional lighting. So now we have a classic case of double vertices. If you just hit A and go into mesh and merge, you can also merge by distance so that you remove the double vertices. Another thing is that you can also left click select this vertex and maybe select this one last. If you wanted to move this vertex to exactly where this is, just make sure that you select both of these and select the white one last, and go into the mesh, merge at last, and you'll see that that one is being merged to this. Another thing, and I hope you remember that while I had a lot of cubes, I said that in object mode you can hit Ctrl J to join them, but what if you wanted to separate them? You would have to well, there are different ways to do it. So one way is to just maybe press L to select link and make sure that they're all selected, and hit shortcut P and separate by selection. And if I were to go into object mode, you'll see that this is now a different object, which is pretty good. And you can also separate by loose parts. So if you were to hit the shortcut P, you can also separate by loose parts. You'll see that this cube isn't connected to this, and this one also isn't connected to this. So if I were to hit P and hit by loose parts to separate by loose parts, go into object mode, you'll see that all of these are now different objects. So let me just remove these for now. So now let me just real quick add in a cube again and talk about the normals setting. So sometimes if I were to just select this and hit Alt N to bring up the normals menu, or I believe you can go over here in normals, and if I were to just flip this normal, you'll see that the shading is super weird. And this is the example of bad normals, because maybe because this is not where the face should be facing. It should be facing outwards like everything else. So what you can do to fix it, for example, I would select everything. You can hit Shift N to make normals consistent, or recalculate normals, and it'll just pick the odd one out and make it face the correct direction. Or you can also hit Alt N and hit flip normals, like so. And now the normals are flipped, and it is where it should be. Sometimes they will be flipped by accident, so you'll have to make them face the right way again. So in the edit mode, there are also a lot of cleanup tools that you can use in case things are not acting the way it should. I already talked about the merge by distance, but what if maybe I added an inset maybe to all of these, like so. Hit X and delete faces. If I were to just select all of these and maybe hit mesh and go to cleanup and fill holes, then you will see that all these edges are being filled on the inside, like so. And that can definitely be super useful sometimes. And another thing, in shading, so I already showed you how to right click and shade smooth, and let me just show it to you on the cube for now. So if I were to right click and shade smooth, you'll see that the shading looks super weird, but one thing is that you can also mark sharp. You'll see that it doesn't really make a difference, and that's because you have to go over here in normals, turn on auto smooth and set it all the way up. You'll see that now it's 180 degrees, and if I were to maybe select this face over here, hit Ctrl E and mark sharp, you'll see that we can select which edges are sharp in the shading. For example, especially for the cylinder, if I were to just turn on auto smooth and turn it all the way up, like so. Maybe shape smooth. I can definitely select this to face, hit Ctrl E and mark sharp just to mark it as sharp. Now, in this case, the auto smooth would have done a pretty good job already, but sometimes we have some pretty irregular objects that we need to make our own shadings on. So other than that, one thing that I like to use, and I believe this is in the vertex menu, so connect vertex path. So if I were to select this vertex and this one and hit the shortcut J, then you can see that these two vertices will be connected pretty well, and we kind of have two semicircles that we can manipulate individually. And maybe, for example, if I were to just use the knife tool from here to here, like so, if I were to select this vertex, and let me just add in another knife tool from here to here. So now I'll try the same thing. I'll select this vertex and I'll select this one and hit the shortcut J. Then it'll try its best to connect them both together while creating all the needed vertices in the middle. So this is definitely a pretty useful tool as well. So I will just add in a cube again, and I'll talk about the edge menu over here. So now let me just talk about bridging edge loops. So if I were to just add in a circle over here, like so, and maybe press Shift D and move it up so that you have two circles. What if I wanted to just have them join together and have forming different faces? So I'll just Alt select this with left click, so Alt left click, and Shift Alt left click to select this edge loop as well. If I were to go into edge menu and hit bridge edge loops, then you'll see that they'll be bridged and they are now connected to each other. Another thing is that you can also, I believe I've shown this before, but if you right click, you can subdivide your objects if you want to. And I guess another tool that can be pretty cool is using the edge crease over here. So if you had a a subdivision modifier, so let me just set it pretty high, like maybe to number 5. If I were to just select a bunch of edges, if you were to go into edge menu here on edit mode and turn up the edge crease, you can actually turn it high and low if you want to, just to crease certain edges. You can also go into the end menu and just go into items and turn the crease high or low. And it is also, you can also set bevel weights. So if I were to add a bevel modifier and set it to weight, if I were to just select this face and turn the bevel weight up, you'll see that only the edges that has the max bevel weight is now beveled. And that is definitely a super useful tool as well. So again, if you have a hole that you want to fill, you just have to select all these edges, maybe shift selecting all these edges, or just alt selecting the loop and hitting the shortcut F, and you'll see that it's being filled pretty well. Another thing is that maybe if I were to subdivide all of this quite a lot, if I were to just hit F to fill it, you'll see that we do create kind of a lot of endgons. So what I would try to do is to maybe try to use a grid fill. So if I were to go into face and press grid fill, then it's going to be filled in a way that just adds the necessary geometry to make it a nice and clean topology as well. Now another tool that I really like to use a lot is to, if I were to go into edit mode on a cube and add in another cube like so while I'm in edit mode, and maybe I move the cube over here, one thing that I really like to use is go into the face menu over here and press intersect boolean. And you can also set it to many different stuff, but you'll see that we have quickly created a boolean operation as well. And this can be definitely super useful for making some tools. Maybe rather than this cube over here, let me just bevel this edge like so. And now I'll hit L to just make sure these are selected like so. So whatever you want to boolean, make sure they're selected in edit mode, go into face and intersect boolean. And now we have created this detail, which is super awesome. So I guess now we have gone through most of the tools that I wanted to get into. Thank you for sitting through all these. In the next video, I will talk about the modifiers and try to give as much examples as I can while I'm doing it. I hope this video didn't take too long, but I definitely wanted to front load you with all these information just in case you would get lost in the later videos, because in the later ones I actually don't explain too much what I'm using. I'm trying to just model as fast as I can. So thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.